Hi there, I'm Darcy Clark and welcome to the Find Your Balance video series. And in this video 2, we're going to work on finding your center of gravity through your feet. Because how the feet meet the ground, how we rest our weight on our feet, affects how the rest of your body relates to the ground. So we're going to look at the 3 points of contact that your feet should make with the floor and looking to find balanced weight through those 3 points. And then we'll also look at finding and feeling and throwing gently our weight off of those centers in order to feel how it affects up through the body. So we're going to start probably in a seated position, whether it's on the floor or in a chair, where you can cross your ankle over your knee. So we're going to take a look at the sole of the foot first. All right, so you've got your foot over your knee if possible, finding a way to palpate your feet with your fingers and possibly see the sole of your foot as well. So on the sole of each foot are 3 main arches of the feet, and the arches act as shock absorbers for the feet, and they also are what help propel us forward through space. We'll start with the inner arch, the medial arch that runs along the mound of the big toe, just behind the toe, and then down to the heel. And then the second arch is the lateral arch that runs along the outer edge of the foot, from the heel up to the baby toe, or baby toe back to the heel. And then the third arch runs across the foot, the transverse arch here, that's pretty much just behind the pads of the feet, along the metatarsals there, those bones just behind the toe bones that help complete this triangle of support that's in your foot. So you can think of each arch forming this triangle of support where most of the weight isn't in the arches. A third of the weight is in our heel, and you can imagine a straight line moving down the center of your leg, down the center of your ankle here, and you can follow that line to your heel, and that's where most of the weight, or a third of the weight, I should say, sits in pretty much it's sort of forward of the heel. So just the front of the center of the heel. And then a third of the weight sits into the mound of the big toe, and then a third of the weight sits into the mound of the baby toe. So you can think of those 3 points as a triangle, and along the lines that connect those 3 points are the arches of the feet that draw away from the floor. So let's come to standing. So now we'll explore moving around those 3 points of connection that the feet make with the ground. So let's just begin. You can feel free to, hold on to something for support. And let's begin by simply rocking the weight forward to the toes. See if you can lift your heels and rise up onto the toes. Notice if the toes tend to want to grip against the ground, and try to feel the pads of your feet from the big toes across to the baby toes spread apart. And then slowly, with as much control as you can, release back to the heels. And then shift the weight a bit back to the heels. And see if you can lift just the toes while staying rested into the pads of your feet, the mounds of the feet there. And so once again, rise up onto the heels. Notice if the weight shifts in or out on your feet as you come up onto your toes. And then go back slowly down to your heels, lifting your toes as much as you can from the ground. And just keep exploring that movement. As you rise up onto the toes, notice if the weight wants to turn in to the inner edges of the feet or fall out to the baby toe sides of the feet. And see if you can keep all 5 of your toes on each foot resting towards the floor. And then come back down with as much control as you can before you lift the toes. And just keep it going at your own pace. It's really not about how many reps you can do or how fast you can do it. It's just feeling your way through the movement and doing it in a way where you remain as balanced as possible. And you might stumble around and, sway a little off balance and have to hold on to something for support. Feel free, just let yourself stay with that practice. This is what it's all about. Okay? All right. And now we'll start to roll our weight onto those inner arches, the inner edges of the feet, and then out to the outer arches of the feet. So try to find this movement as much as you can through your ankles. So it's sometimes helpful for some strange reason to move the hands with the movement that you're trying to do with your feet. The hands sort of encourage the movement. So feel free to do that. I'm doing that myself. So you might notice that your knees and your hips are moving a lot. So instead of sort of initiating the movement through the hips, so here I'm finding a lot more movement into the hips in order to do the action, and I'm not actually getting a whole lot of movement into the ankles. I mean, I'm getting some, but see if you can, instead of initiating the movement through your hips, and feel free to have a little bend in the knees here still, though, shift out by moving the ankles. Yes, so you're trying to draw the big toe sides of the feet up and then release them down, and then try to bring the baby toe sides of the feet up. So rolling out and rolling in. Rolling out and rolling in. And just notice as well, do the toes, tense up through the movement? And can you roll across your toes? Let them come to the floor as you roll in and as you roll out. And you might just notice, so let's pause with the feet turned in. So with the rolling of the weight more into the big toe side, more into the sort of inner heel. And just notice how, maybe even look down and notice how your knees have knocked in towards each other. So the knees have gone in towards each other, the thigh bones are rolling in, and most of the weight is on the inside. And just even notice how that maybe even affects your pelvis. Maybe it shifts your pelvis a little forward, tailbone up, maybe it juts your ribs forward. Just notice how it feels for you. And then try to do the opposite. Once again, rolling onto the outer edges of your feet. So now most of the weight is on the baby toe mound and on the outer edge of the heel. And notice and look down and see that your knees have now moved apart, further away from each other, and maybe even slightly wider than hip distance, depending. And just notice how that has even affected the position of your pelvis, your ribs, your spine, your head. Okay? And then try to rest into the soles of your feet to find where you're centered and even across those 3 points of each foot. And then this next movement is more about sort of where the ankle sits. So if you take a look at my feet, I'm going to rest my ankles, sort of roll my weight more towards the inner arch of the foot. And then if you try to do the opposite, you can kind of sit more weight trying to flatten the outer arches of your feet. So I'm not even actually lifting the sides or the edges of my feet as much as possible, but instead keeping contact with those 3 points while letting my ankles roll in and letting my ankles sort of roll out. And again, just feel how when you roll your ankles in, those inner arches of the feet end up sort of collapsing and flattening closer to the floor. And then as you roll out, the inner arches of the feet actually lift away from the floor. The outer arches sort of collapse. And if you can find that medium spot where you're neither rolling in nor rolling out, you'll likely feel the most support there. If it's new for you, if you tend to roll in or if you tend to roll out, finding center might actually take a little bit of time and might feel less stable for you because you're not used to it. However, when you find center, you're using your support through the inner thighs, through the outer thighs, through the inner and outer knees equally, rather than stressing or straining one part inside or out. Okay? And now let's just start out by shifting weight from one foot to the other. So trying to keep your hips in the center, so you're not going to sway your hips off center in order to do this movement. And instead, you're going to try to keep your hips in line with your shoulders. So your shoulders are going to stay in line with your hips. And you're going to try to move more, not from the hips, but rather from the ankles again. So let your whole body sort of teeter over into one leg and then teeter over to the other leg. And just feel how the weight shifts into one foot and then into the other foot. And just notice, does one leg, does one foot carry your weight sort of more easily, more naturally, more effortlessly, less awkwardly, any of those things. Just get a sense of that. And then keeping the soles of the feet still on the floor, so the toes and the heels aren't going to lift. We're going to sort of teeter, and this is where you might actually want to hold on to something if you need that extra stability and support. Feel free to use it. So again, rather than leaning forward and back with the hips leading the way, we're going to again try to keep the hips right underneath the shoulders, head above the shoulders, and again initiate the movement through the ankles to shift the weight forward towards your toes, and then to shift the weight back towards your heels. So I'm going to walk a little closer to the chair, so when I shift back, I can still hold on to it. That's it. So often shifting back towards the heels is what sort of throws us off balance. And you might feel like you're going to fall back. And it's that action of just moving your center of gravity a little behind center is what people find most unnerving and difficult to recover from. So it's a really good way to practice your balance. And, as you get more comfortable with it, you can do it without holding on to something. And, before, when you go back, recover and shift forward. So now we're going to basically combine those two movements, left and right, forward and back, into more of a circular movement. So it's a really small circular movement. It's really not a whole lot of movement. So again, feel free to hold on to something for this one. Likely sort of in front of you is probably the most supportive. So just starting again in your sort of mountain pose, and then try to shift the weight forward, over into one leg, and around through the heels, and over into the other leg. Coming forward towards the toes or the balls of the feet, over towards one foot, back towards the heels, over into the other foot. And just keep it going. So really you're shifting your weight around sort of the edges of your feet, the outsides of your feet, through the toes, pads of the feet, to the outer edge, through the heels, into that other foot. And so just feel and find all those areas of the feet, the outer areas of the feet, shifting your weight forward and back, left to right, right to left. So we found the circles in one direction, try to find them in the other. And again, you want to try not to just move your hips around. So this is lovely to do as well. But instead of doing that, let's try to find the movement more from the ankles, which will be a little more strengthening for the ankles and a little more strengthening for the core muscles. So You found the circles in one direction, find them in the other. Often the second direction you do feels a little less stable, perhaps a little more awkward. So try to keep the movement, just go as slowly as you need to. And again, try not to lift the soles of your feet. You're not lifting your toes, you're not lifting your heels. Instead, you're shifting the weight around those points, through the heels, into one foot, through the toes, and over into the other foot. Okay, try to keep the legs mostly straight. Try to feel your head and your chest and your navel stay in the same line as you roll the weight around your feet. Okay, yeah. And then come back to center. And then see if you can find your mountain pose where you're supported through both feet, left to right, finding even and equal weight bearing down through both legs, into both feet, to find where you're centered and even across those 3 points of each foot. And then once you've found that as best you can, try to relax and rest your toes to the floor, keeping your toes relaxed with as little grip in them as possible. So you might even just notice, my toes want to grip a lot. So as you find the support more through the pads of the feet and back into the heels, through those 3 points, through that triangle of support, the more the toes themselves can relax and the more supported you'll actually feel through your feet. Join me for my next video, video 3 in the Finding Your Balance series, where we will practice some standing balance.